This and other issues, we have Republican strategist Leslie Shred and Democratic strategist David Litt. Hello both, thank you very much for coming on the programme. I'm going to talk through a couple of the pressing issues right now, but let's start with the economic data. Interest rate cuts, it was being called for by the administration and many others as well. Not a surprise, as we heard there. Is this something that you can divorce the politics from and the pressure externally, or was this just, Leslie, a straight economic decision?
I think it was just a straight economic decision. Look, today's news is good news for American consumers, good news for American borrowers. I understand why the Fed is cautious. They made mistakes before. You know, they didn't cut rates quickly enough when inflation was rising under President Biden's administration. So now they're concerned. But two wrongs don't make a right. We've gotten inflation under control. Now is the time to cut rates, to continue to cut these rates. Otherwise, you're just hurting the economy.
Are you worried about things like inflation now potentially, or you back this decision?
Well, I do think that one of the things people just heard on this program, that tariffs haven't been inflationary, that's just not true. And the idea that tariffs are exclusively a tax on companies isn't true. And what worries me most is I'm not an economist, right? I'm not working in the administration doing economics. I'm a former speechwriter. I should know less about the economy, not more, than some of the more ideological people in the administration or the former people who've served this administration. What you saw today, I think, as Leslie points out, is a really important reminder of why an independent Federal Reserve matters. That whether people agree or disagree with this rate cut, they're not saying this was because the White House demanded it. And if we start to see with what the White House wants, which is the Federal Reserve essentially become a political tool of the White House, then that confidence is going to disappear. And that's going to have very far-ranging and really damaging effects, not just for the economy in the abstract, but for individual consumers, for businesses, for Americans.
Well, following on that, Leslie, is there a responsibility here for Republicans to come out and say just that, restoring that independence and perceived independence?
Well, I think it's important to make sure we're distinguishing between independence and politicization, right? The Federal Reserve members are selected by the President of the United States. They're approved by the United States Senate. Both of these are political entities. So the idea that there is absolutely no politics involved when it comes to the Federal Reserve is just false. What you want is the key word that both of you used, right? Independence. And President Trump has made it clear he wants an independent Federal Reserve. And I think what he wants in addition to that, though, is a Federal Reserve that is going to respond in a timely fashion to changing economic conditions. I think today is a good first step, and I hope to see more.
OK, let's move on to international affairs. Donald Trump receiving the full treatment, really, over there in London. David, how significant, you've written speeches for big events, how significant do you think this big event was?
Well, I think this is particularly significant in these sort of diplomatic negotiations that the UK is undergoing right now with the United States over all kinds of issues, because there's really sort of two unusual ways to get policy concessions out of Donald Trump. One of them is outright corruption. That's what you saw recently with the UAE. There's been this investigation where basically, you know, they give the Trump family and some other Trump administration family members enormous amounts of investment in crypto, and then in exchange, although alleged exchange, right, there's policy concessions made on AI chips. Another way of getting policy favors from the Trump administration is to give a former reality TV host the headlines, the images that he wants. And that's a very effective way, frankly. I think it's a smart strategic decision by the UK to say it costs us essentially nothing to give him the pomp and circumstance that he so desperately craves. And that probably gives us advantages when it comes to negotiating thornier issues.
Okay. I'll just underline the alleged there in your earlier comments.
Yes.
What do you make of that? Is this in some way tricky for Donald Trump supporters in that is he not being played here, but this is a deliberate, obvious tactic of flattery for Donald Trump, and he's kind of going along with it?
You're talking about us highlighting one of the most important strategic relationships in the world, the United States and the United Kingdom. From the pictures and videos I've seen, from the reporting that is coming out, what I am seeing is King Charles's government warmly welcoming President Trump over to the United Kingdom. And I think that that sends a powerfully important message, not only to our allies, but also to our adversaries, that the special relationship is as strong as ever.
OK, on that special relationship, David, what kind of concrete policy, ideas, foreign policy discussions and kind of consequences could we end up here by the time that Donald Trump is on the plane back to the US?
Well, I don't know where we'll end up. I mean, if I did, I think that would be, that would be great, right? But I think what is interesting and unprecedented about this moment in diplomacy, not just with the US and the UK, but in general, is that you see a much more distracted president than you normally do. So just to give you an example, you saw the president sort of condemn the Israeli attack on Qatar, but then Marco Rubio shows up and says, maybe there's nothing we can do, and then everyone seems to move on. And so while I think Trump is very interested in projecting strength at home, including potentially trying to crack down on political dissent and free speech, when it comes to projecting strength abroad and being consistent and credible, he is kind of all over the place. He seems easily distracted. So I think it's anyone's guess what we're going to end up with.
Leslie, I'll give you a chance to come back on that, easily distracted or not. But what is the approach, do you think, overarching approach of Donald Trump to his allies and key allies, many of them feeling pretty bruised at times? What do you think the strategy is?
I think sometimes the president he wants to make our allies stronger. That's what he has been doing with NATO. And I think that we're seeing that happen right now. I am really interested to find out what went on between him and King Charles. They reportedly had a pretty long one-on-one conversation. I know that King Charles in particular has been very supportive of Ukraine. Would be really interesting to hear, how that exchange went and what they decided upon. What I'm looking for coming out of this is some more concrete decisions and cooperation when it comes to helping Ukraine. And I think that needs to start with some significant sanctions that are imposed by both the United States and by Europe. I would love to see repo finally implemented both by the United States and Europe. Belgium is sitting on something like 250 billion euros of frozen Russian assets. Now is the time to liquidate that, to get that money to Ukraine so that they can purchase the weapons that they need and start to rebuild their country. And I would also like to see us get more weapons into Ukraine, both us and Europe.
OK, we will see the politics tomorrow. Of course, Donald Trump meeting Keir Starmer, where no doubt issues exactly around that will be discussed. We must leave it there. David, Leslie, thank you both very much for coming in. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Now, around the world, across the UK, this is BBC News.